Welcome to This Youth Generation, working to improve the quality of life for youth in our community. I am your host, Deon D, author and youth life skills coach. I'm looking forward to engaging you on the topic of critical issues concerning today's youth generation by way of informative edutainment through storytelling, discussions, and interviews. If you're a parent, educator, or youth worker, this program will be a valuable resource for you. Let's get to it. I would like to thank our podcast guests, Mr. Edric Jerome and Ms. Mona Hall. Appreciate your participation and thank you for joining me. Today's subject is interesting. It was evolved from a recent column that asked the interesting question, is there genetic predisposition for criminal behavior? And was brought out based on a column that was recently written, and the column was asking certain questions. I'll get a little bit of excerpts from the column and then we'll get some input. So the column was generated by an interesting conversation that I had with a parent, right? And the parent was concerned about their child's recent behavior. And the behavior that the child was exhibiting was concerning. So the parent was concerned about their child's sudden digression into serious antisocial behavior in school and in criminal acts. So, however, over this maladaptive behavior was concerning, and it escalated to the point where the child was getting expelled from school and possibly getting into the criminal justice system. However, the interesting question that has been raised by some parents concerning about the children's genetic makeup. Now, the youth in question has a biological father with a long history of crime and has been incarcerated for more than 10 years. There has been no contact with the biological father since this child was an infant. His home environment has no alarming indication that would lead him to the life of crime or violence or maladaptive behavior, yet he would spend time, this kid in question, incarcerated. The question was raised, what is the main factor in determining a child's development? Is it nature or nurture? Is it genetic predisposition, or is it simply the conditions of the environment? And why is it hard to believe that behaviors may be passed on? In some cases, their conditions are obviously unhealthy for the environment as the development of a child, such as alcoholism. Besides having alcoholism, health issues, arts, talent, disposition for gaining weight, health issues, mannerisms, physical attributes, all these things are passed on genetically. So the question is, why, or is it possible for antisocial or criminal behavior to be passed on genetically as well? You can raise certain children in certain environments and they will have two different effects. I'm a witness to that. I've experienced that as well. I've worked with young people from well-nurtured and stable and comfortable living environments with two-parent households and no addictions, no neglect, no abuse, and who became teens who have self-destructed their lives and the lives of others around them before they have reached adulthood. The question is why and how. Is that nurture or is it nature? Some individuals have the fortitude to not only survive an extremely dysfunctional environment or unhealthy childhood, but excel and succeed because of it. The illustration was an example of our environment, right? If a child can have a healthy environment, but they can have some genetics internally that can really affect how they develop as an adult. Again, that question is raised, is it nature or nurture? And is there genetic predisposition for certain behaviors? And should we be concerned, right? Just a thought. So let's put it out there. What are some thoughts on that? Experience, personal experience, research experience. What are some thoughts that you all may have about this subject matter? Anyone have some thoughts on that so far?
I think it could be both. It could be the nurturing of a child and the conditions of their environment. And then on the other hand, you could believe that internal genetics and a predisposition is involved. So you probably also have to look at each child individually, of course.
Right.
But the nurturing and the conditions of the environment, I think if you're looking at, if you put these on a scale, the nurturing and conditions of environment on one side and genetic predisposition on the other, I would weigh it more towards the nurturing and the conditions of the environment. That's how I would view it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's pretty big. What are your thoughts on that, Mr. Jerome?
I tend to agree that I think for me it would be more environment and influence, exposure, because when I think of a genetic disposition, that's something that, I'm not a clinician, that you could test for. I mean, you can test to see if you're prone to diabetes. You can test to see if you're prone to, various health ailments, skin color, eye color. I mean, all that stuff is you can physically test for that kind of stuff. I don't know if you can test and have a clinical outcome to determine if someone's predisposed for crime. I'm just not sure that's possible.
No, yeah, I think you're right. There's, I'm certainly not a psychologist or have any that type of training, but just with personal observation and the little bit of research or what you've heard from those who are the professionals, it would seem that for our people, the conditions of the environment, a lot of things that that's not made available to us. And then if you're given an opportunity, when an opportunity comes to a child that is positive, I think they can excel. You can excel.
Right.
So it's just some of these things are just intuitive, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with that, both those, because there are some things in your make that you are prone to as well, just like health conditions, right? There's some people who are genetically have a genetic predisposition condition of gaining weight. It's in their bloodline, or in my family, it's blood pressure or things like that. So, and there's some that say some experts or some sociologists have determined that some addictions are also genetically, person can be prone to certain addictions of alcoholism or whatever. So they've done some studies that way. So the thought could be, if everyone did a bloodline test of all the issues, like if you got a mass backdrop of study in your bloodline, determine that there's in your bloodline there's a condition or common of these conditions, be it behavior issue, anger issue, impulsivity, anything, then that will just make us more careful that, hey, I'm vulnerable to this, so I better be careful. I know in my bloodline, alcoholism is a huge issue. Goes back, generations of alcoholism. And me seeing what my mother went through, that made me, and also seeing what some of my family members went through from her bloodline that was susceptible to that made me a little bit more cautious of being more than just nothing more than a casual drinker. I don't drink because of that possibility of me being vulnerable to the possibility of becoming an alcoholic of any type of addiction, right? So if that's the case, if temperament is passed on, anybody know people, everybody in your family got a short fuse. I got family members or people that all y'all got short fuses. Anybody that bad, everybody that all y'all got that short fuse, right? And they're prone to going off real quick. So if everybody in your family got a real short fuse, then the next people that come along say, hey, this is in our bloodline, then we want to be extra careful and be mindful of our temperament, because we know we have the tendency of going off quicker than the average person. Is that behavior or is that nurture, right? And to your point, both of your points, is probably a combination of the two. It's a scary thing, right? It's very scary.
It is.
It make you want to study your blood history. How many criminals I got in my family, right? But it's also something to study how we judge people, and we be careful because we don't know the traumatic history that young people have. That could have an effect on it. Racial trauma. With me, it was violence. PTSD from growing up in South Central Los Angeles, seeing so much violence, and that's real. It made me paranoid about certain things, so that affected my behavior.
Yeah, you don't have to be a professional to realize and understand these things.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what age were when you discovered that, and even including the topic, at what age do you think you would be able to determine if someone was predisposed to crime? As a kid, when they're teens, because I think that would play into it as well, as how old are the child we're talking about at 6. I don't know if you could say, I'm sure people have tried to label someone, oh, that's gonna be a criminal, I know it. Wow. Not based on any objective testing. It's just the environment they're in, what they're exposed to at an early age. So what age do you think this would come into play?
And it's mentioned, it's interesting that you brought that up, because doing my research for this subject matter, as a matter of fact, Ms. Starlet English witnessed a documentary recently about the youngest serial killer that she did in this documentary. It was in the Native American community. This young kid was 6 years old. Wow. And this young kid ended up, unfortunately, strangling 2 of his family members, a toddler and another 5 or 6 year old. And then later on, before it was determined that was him, he got a hold of another person in the community or in the tribe, and end up strangling another 9-month-old child. So they said this person was the youngest serial killer. And this documentary, according to Ms. English, they were trying to determine, it was such a secluded community in this Native American tribe, no access to media, so no influence right there, no exaggerated amount of violence that they're exposed to through music or media. No, the families never witnessed or did anything like that. So the question psychologists and people were studying, where did this come from? How did this young person become so violent at such a young age? And to your point, Mr. Edric, there's your question. Maybe there's the benchmark right there at 6.
So would the professionals look at that as a genetic disposition, predisposition, or?
Yes, I don't know if they what conclusion, because I didn't actually see the entire documentary. But from what I gathered from Ms. English, they said they were leaning toward looking at the history, the bloodline of this 6-year-old. Not because it obviously wasn't the environment, right? So there's another case study that kind of brought out some interesting topics on this. Here's what I learned from a study that was recently done by the American International College, right? International College. It says debates about criminality have long been focused on the relative contributions of the environment and genetics as components of antisocial and destructive behavior. Although genetic explanations for criminal behavior have been circulated since the emergence of modern criminology in the 1700s, until recently, there has not been the scientific evidence to substantiate or refute any claims. The past decade or so has seen an increase in research on the genetics of behavior, including antisocial behavior. The findings of some of these research studies have inspired media speculation about its policy implications. Many criminologists are understandably concerned about the potential misuse of the research given the earlier historical experiences with the eugenic use made of biological explanation of crime and of genetic explanations in particular. The brief paper summarizes the evidence. Recent twin studies show persuasive evidence that both genetic and behavior environmental factors contribute to antisocial behavior. However, the genetic evidence indicates that there is no single gene, to your point, Mr. No single gene, or even a small number of genes that predict an increased risk of antisocial behavior. Where there have been some effects, the increase in risk associated with the antisocial behavior is modest. A technical appendix to this paper discussed candidate genes for antisocial behavior and is available. So to the point, they're saying basically they're not sure, they can't define whether it is or it isn't, but it's a possibility of a combination of both being the subject matter. And that's kind of where we are at this point, the subject matter.
Yeah, I would think that, you know, people would definitely be interested in that. And when you mentioned the word eugenics, which you know, is a little chilling because, you know, eugenics was not necessarily a good thing in terms of white supremacy and so forth and so on, and what they were, you know, the Nazis, and it all kind of started right over here at Stanford University, the whole eugenics movement. So they were trying to use eugenics as a way to justify superiority of a certain race. So
Gotcha.
people get a little weird, rightfully so, when the word eugenics is used. Now, it may be, you know, other clinical uses for it, but that whole area has not been kind to people who look like us.
Right.
And so it's yeah, I would even think it would be controversial to even go down that road, and, you know, who would do that research, and where would they, what would they do with that information?
Absolutely.
Because
and where the sources of that research and
right.
what sample sizes are they using, right?
Right. And the diversity of samples. You know, I don't want them tested on just one particular population. Right. Hello. Right. You know, we'd have to have some cross-sectional, some cross, you know, ethnic, different races, economic income. I mean, you'd have to really, really broaden that study to make a determinant, because
to make it effective and make it more credible. Trust the source.
There's trauma in data, because we are traumatized when, you know, no matter what data set you see, especially around health, you know, African Americans are more likely to suffer X than whites.
Right.
African Americans are more, I mean, no matter what it is, hypertension, diabetes, poverty, all of the data points that people try to do just to survive, just to be part of the society. We are hit with that every day when you're constantly told how worse off you are than other people. And, you know, I think there is some truth to that, that we are just bombarded with all of this information about how we don't, quote unquote, measure up. And so to your point, Mona, I agree with you. You know, who's doing the counting, who's got the clipboard, who's you know.
Well, you know, then yes, when you speak of these medical, the medical field, when they do these studies, when they do all these things, we're not represented in them. And so, you know, well, we're going to look at this certain thing, but we're not represented in it at all. So we're not part of the study.
And so again, they got to trust the source. Let's get a few readers' feedback on the column that was written a couple of weeks ago. A couple of readers chimed in on the subject matter, and I want to get a couple of their inputs on it. One is from a reader, SK out of Fairfield. He says, "A great question, Mr. Price. My wife was a preschool teacher, pre-K to 4 years old, for nearly 40 years. And she swears up and down that all children are born good. I disagree. She can be bad right. She can be a bad right out of the womb. A child can be. You can see them early on in elementary school. The ones more prisons are built for. These are too many cases. There are too many cases of great parents raising a devil spawned, and then the opposite. So go figure." So this person really believes that they're born ill spirit SK. And I respond, I mean, I don't think I think there may be, like I said, some conditions where a person may have a short fuse or maybe impulsive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be, you know, the next, you know, violent offender. That those conditions can be identified early on, and they can be nurtured to healthier behaviors. I've seen some knucklehead young people but they don't have to be knucklehead adults, right? They learn how to deal with their condition, right? Back to the health issue. If you have a person that has a history of diabetes and in your family, then you need to know, okay, they don't have to be my future. I'm going to watch what I eat because I know I got that possibility.
Right.
It's funny you mentioned violent crime, because that's another, I guess, slice to this is what type of crime are we talking about?
Right.
Because if you're going to say someone's genetically predisposed to commit a crime, then what about all the hedge fund fraud folks out there?
That's criminal.
Right. So are they, because they're not coming from a certain community, right? Yeah. They're out there committing bond fraud and
different classifications.
Exactly. So if we're going to talk white collar crime,
absolutely,
or crimes of political malfeasance or whatever, then let's include all of that conversation. Absolutely. And not just the violent crimes too.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And those a history of generational crimes that are considered white collar or not violent. And even you can even look at violent crimes. If you talk about stereotypes, Caucasian men are the only one that don't get stereotyped. Yet they seem to have the easiest stereotype to find out who is more common to mass murders is white males, right? Serial killing is white males, but they don't get stereotyped. But a Hispanic or a Black person, two of us can do something, and that's all of us, right? Right. So there's that imbalance.
It's a power dynamic. Absolutely. It's a power dynamic in that who's writing the laws? Right. The laws do not fit them anymore. They rewrite them. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. Enforcement too, because enforcement is just as powerful as the written law. Is selective enforcement of the law. Yes. If you only enforce the law in certain zip codes, you're going to have a higher, right? So if you go to other zip codes and enforce the same laws, then there'd be outrage. So
absolutely,
all of this is all relevant and it's all connected. And again, to the question at hand, these are the types of, to me, the nuances of this discussion that would have to be had, to get to that answer.
I want to include another person's feedback. It's Miss Shirley Tarkington, who couldn't be on tonight, but said she's a reader and a participant. She says, honestly, I believe criminal behavior is a learned behavior by way of environment. We all have the ability to be moral or immoral. It's a matter of what you are feeding. What you are feeding. What does she mean by, what do you think she mean, what you are feeding? I wish I could ask her that. I wonder what she meant by what you are feeding, what's in.
Maybe what you're being, maybe fed, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe the information that the child may be.
It's a matter of what you are feeding them.
Fed, yeah.
Interesting. What they're intaking. And that's right. The environment make, right? If you're getting fed constant, I think I get it now. You're getting fed from your early childhood, verbally abused and it's in your environment, that could become, a person's words and then what they learn. I think it was Malcolm X that said we act violent because we think violent. We think violent because we believe in violence, and we believe in violence because we are taught violence. That's from Malcolm X from the 60s. And so there is a conditioning of there. And our environment certainly is saturated with sex and violence and unhealthy behaviors in every aspect of our intake. So just as we can be careful what we take in our bodies physically, we have to be just as careful how we take into our mindsets, especially the most vulnerable population. And what this column and this platform and this podcast is about is how do we help our young people, because they're the most vulnerable, right? So if they're being saturated with violence and it's become the norm, then why should we be surprised that our teens are now becoming less sensitive to violence and less impacted by violence because of their conditioning? I started implement when I started doing mentoring, is the first assignment I do for the young people is research your own bloodline, your own family history and all that. That's a good start. And I did that as a project of my own. I came from the discoveries where most of our family traditionally was from the South, Louisiana, Shreveport, Louisiana to be exact. And the second generation in the 60s, myself included, we were all born in LA. So it wasn't till decades, 20 something years later, that I went back to what we call home and saw what our origins was about. And I went back to Shreveport, Louisiana. And we had buildings with our names on them. I'm talking about restaurants, farms and doctor's office with our name on it. And we out here in LA acting a fool.
Well, it's the Great Migration that got us out here. I have the same kind of experience because I went back and we from a small town called Opelousas in Louisiana. So yes, we need to know these things and learn these things.
And when you learn that, like me, when I learned that, it changed my perspective when I got back to LA. When I was middle school and high school, I'm like, how are we out here acting a fool when this is where we are? This is who we are. Now, of course, we probably had some knuckleheads, of course, in there too. But like to my point, I'm aware of it, that I got that element in me. So I'm a little bit more cautious, right? So when I pass it on to the challenging young people, I say, go home and first of all, study your bloodline. First, start with where your name
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where did your name come from? Who gave you your name? And I was working at the YMCA and I had a young kid, it was a basketball team. This young kid, there was 9-year-olds. And this young man's name was Jackie Robinson Wilson.
Okay.
Jackie Robinson Wilson. And I asked everybody, well, he had no idea where his name came. I knew it. I said, man, you go home tonight. And whoever opens the door for you when you go home, tell them that we have a project. You want to know who gave you your name, why, who you named after, and what, just the whole story. Everybody bring that story back to practice tomorrow. Boy, you should have seen this young kid. His chest was stuck out. He was like, I'm named after Jackie Robinson, the first Negro league. His whole swagger changed.
That's beautiful.
And that was like build. I'm like, that's what, even you being named after someone gives you a sense of pride. Now you could have had some, your name could be Bundy. You need to find out what, or Hitler. You better do some research because you may have some evil in your damn blood.
Right. Or Trump. Hello.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
But there's some truth to that, man, because my parents and all my folks was from Arkansas. But my dad and mom every summer, from time I could remember until I was maybe late teens, we'd go back. We'd get in the car and drive back every summer. So we drive from California to Arkansas. And so I saw, where they came from. I saw where my mom grew up and just how far out in quote unquote in the country it was. And
dark experiences.
At night. Yeah. Hello. It was, and the different noises. Well, on my grandmother's, my mother's, my grandmother and my grandfather, the last house they had, there were the street that they lived on. There were two houses, theirs and their neighbors. Across the street was a church, and right next door was a cemetery. And then the street was paved up right to the line of the cemetery, and then it was dirt road, and then you go off into the woods, man. Wow. So when we would go down there, and we're from California, Northern California, we're not used to that. When I was younger, it was not terrifying, but you would be aware of the sounds and things like that at night. The point I'm making is that what you said is so true. Knowing where my parents came from, what their environment was for them, it just gave me perspective on myself and who I am, and gave me a sense of, I guess, value of these are the folks who made it possible for me to be where I am today. Right? They went through so much and actually left. And came to Great California. Migration. Right. And my generation, like, you and I, we were talking the other day, we're pretty close in age. I never had to migrate somewhere else. Right. Like a lot of folks did, a lot of older folks, they had to come from the South to the North to go to the Midwest to come to the, out West. So I don't know what that experience is like as a young man, 19, 20 years old, to have to pick up and go somewhere else only because you're escaping all of the traps that were set down there for people to get caught up in, and the lack of opportunity. So and we were talking earlier about what we carry inside of us, and I think there's some of that we carry that inside of us.
Yeah.
And that's part of our DNA.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our ancestors, we have to praise our ancestors, the ones that were able to make that movement, the ones that the Middle Passage did not take down, the ones that got to these Americas, more South America than our America, the Caribbean, strong bloodlines, strong people.
The interesting thing about bloodlines and all that characteristics, that's good and the bad, and we got to embrace the possibility of both. And the most obvious part of that is how talent is passed on. I pulled up a few obvious talent genetics, right? So one thing, let's go high profile, right? Sports, the Peyton bloodline, right? Yeah, no, Manning.
Right.
Yeah, Manning. He had Archie Manning, Peyton Manning, and the other one,
Eli.
Thank you. Now,
these are the football guys, right?
Yes. Now,
they all play the same position.
Yes, and they're pretty good. They're damn good.
Right.
Now, some may say, okay, it's privileged, but no, wait a minute. I don't care how privileged you are. You're not making it to the NFL on privilege alone. That's too big. Same with Barry Bonds and Bobby Bonds. Bobby Bonds was an outstanding ball player, but Barry Bonds was phenomenal, right? Now, he was around Willie Mays and not Jesse, but Reggie Jackson and all them cats, but still, no privilege is going to give you the advantage of hitting a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. No, there ain't no privilege in the world. That's skill, right? You're talking Dale Curry and Steph Curry. Hey, mama, everybody in their family, and they got what's their brother named Seth Curry.
Seth Curry.
And I heard him. All the pros, even their mama can shoot.
Yeah.
I haven't heard their mama can shoot.
It's three of the Currys, huh?
Yeah, it's Dale Curry, who was played.
The father.
You got Steph, who's phenomenal. Then you got Seth and all. I mean, I'm telling you, you check Jelly Bean Bryant and Kobe Bryant. I mean,
the Griffeys, man. King Griffey Jr. and his father. He played with his father on the same team.
In the same outfield.
Right.
Griffey Jr. So talent, right? And you can go into entertainers and all that as well. But I strongly believe if that talent bloodline can be passed on, then we got to accept the fact that not so great valuable things can be passed on too. Now, I know some people in my own family that never spent any time with their biological people. The same mannerism. I'm like, dang, whoa, it's kind of scary. Do you know who you sound like right now? I mean, I got some families that ain't never spent no time, but I know they family. I know there's some cats I wouldn't, I'm like looking at them sideways. I'm like, whoa, right? But now they're nieces and nephews, my nieces and nephews, and they say or do some stuff, and the older people in the family be looking at each other like, where that come from, right?
That's a good point.
I'm telling you, I'm like, whoa, right? How did they get that?
Yes.
It ain't nurture, because they ain't seen this dude. Until like the article brought out, this young person that the parent was concerned about, they spent no time with their father at all. And he's a professional criminal, long time, he's, all that. And now his son is picking up some of those in anything. So with that said, we should close out with, let's think about some anecdotes. Let's say both of those are true. And to your point, Ms. Mona, let's say they were 60-40. Let's say they're 50-50.
Yeah.
50% nature, 50%, genetics. We all got that. So you got a little bit of this and a little bit of that, like it or not.
Right.
Like it or not, you got something in you that you have no control over. The other part is how you manage that. You can have that same talent that your talent brought in, but if you don't cultivate that talent, it's not going to reach the professional level, like the examples we gave with Seth Curry. He could have that talent, but what if he never had to pick up a basketball?
Right.
Or didn't want to pick up a basketball, because there are times when, hey, I don't want to play football. I want to go be an aeronautics engineer. I don't want to, get out there on the field and pads on. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
So it could have been in there all along, but he chose not to. And that goes both ways. I got some ill-spirited stuff in me, but I choose not to cultivate that because I know there's a possibility. I don't give it any life. Right.
Let me ask you that then. Let me jump in on that real quick, because I think it piqued a question with me. Is it more genetic disposition, or can it be a spiritual disposition? Are inherent spirits, like to your point earlier, you said, oh yeah, he acted just like his grandfather, right? I mean, are there spiritual things that predispose people to? I mean, because our culture, when I say our culture, if we go back to our original culture, spirituality and the spirits and connecting with those who came before us was paramount.
Yeah,
that's true. You would talk to literally they would have sessions and talk to the spirits, talk to the elders, and get so is there something to that, man? It could be.
It could be. You can bring up those energy. Good point. I like to really investigate and leave our listeners, and when we record this and put it out there, that let's package something that we can give to our youth workers, our parents, and our youth themselves, assuming that everyone has a little bit of both of those in us. How can we support and encourage our young people, our parents, youth workers, to cultivate the healthy part of their genetic and their environment so it don't become unhealthy or antisocial behavior? If they see signs of that, do we see signs of that? Do we oppress it, or do we cultivate it? Right. Mm-hmm. So it is paramount to us to recognize and watch very closely the temperament, the development of our young people. Mm-hmm. So when we see those things, we proactively deal with them. Now, I tell all my family's business. I always tell them, I tell all my family's business. So every story I tell, I ain't telling all that business. If somebody can learn from my business, I'm telling it.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. So I got my own, my kids, and I see my kids. I have an older son from a previous fiance. We never got married, and I have 3 other kids with my ex-wife. So when that first son came along, boy, I thought I was the greatest parent. That boy listened. He was like, hey, I never had to yell at Duran, right? I had to yell. All I had to do was get my firm voice, right? He was cool. Went through school. He's such a great kid. Then that second one came along 4 years later, and I'm like, oh shit, game changer, right? I had to tell this kid over and over again, 9, 10 times, right? And somebody would say, why didn't you do? Because he listened the first time. So when it came to discipline is just like medicine. Some people need a higher dosage. Too much not enough can be ineffective, and too much can kill them. So I have to balance between this. Who needs the higher doses of medicine? The hard-headed one, right?
Right.
And that just goes to speak to their genetic make. The second one is just a little emotionally, a little differently built than this one. So we have to cultivate that. So now when they both played basketball, I saw that, and this one was cool, calm, and collected. So you listen, and this was a little bit more fiery and passionate, and that had it good as bad. But outside of the basketball court, that can be a danger. So I told him, you got to control your emotions outside of basketball, because you'll get more than just a technical foul.
Yeah.
So I saw the talent in them that was genetically passed on, the competitive spirit that they probably got from me, and then that other side that they may have gotten somewhere, and I have to be very cautious. So I think it's a good offering to let's monitor our young people and diligently see where those behaviors are, and then cultivate those that can lead them to prosperity, and diligently oppress those that can lead them to trouble. Well said. That's safe to say. I sure appreciate you guys, your input. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. And I'll close out by saying I appreciate the opportunity of discussing critical issues concerning today's youth generation. Is there a possibility of predisposition of criminal behavior being passed on genetically? The thought was interesting, and I'm glad we came to some reasonable options. So I appreciate the conversation. Just a thought, just a message. This youth generation, Deon Price, just a humble servant trying to make a difference. Thank you for participating. Thank you for listening. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this program, download the podcast or subscribe to the channel. We appreciate your support.